Only company projects on company property? Sure. While in college, I had a co-op semester in a shop environment with a small company. My position was a designer with their product development team. And there were not very many tools available to make things. We were expected to produce concept prototypes out of cardstock and Elmer's glue. When our first presentation was met with disappointment since they just hired this new intern to improve the quality of deliverables. Referring to me, I decided to do something about it. Over the next couple of weeks I started bringing in my own tools from my personal shop. I had a whole menagerie of woodworking tools, automotive tools, my welder, and even a couple of my 3D printers. I turned their chintzy studio area into a respectable prototyping space. The next presentation went very well when we were able to show a very fancy model paired with CAD designs and the associated 3D prints, detailed woodwork, and even bespoke metal details. Everyone was very happy, and I got to work with my own tools at my job. It was good times. Then came the reversal. The company had originally hired me as part of their expansion. And about 2 months after I had joined, roughly a month after I built their shop, the company was finally big enough to hire a single HR person. If you have ever had to compete with the mental gymnastics of human resources, I am sure you know where I am going with this. One evening, I was staying late to work on some personal projects. My immediate supervisor and everyone I worked with was aware that I did this. New HR lady was not. The day after, she called me in for a chat. It essentially went like this. "Why did you leave so late after clocking out last night?" "I was just working on some personal projects." "Okay, well, you can't use the company space for personal projects. It is against policy." "Why?" "It has never been a problem before. Running a shop costs money. And if that money isn't invested into the company's projects, then it isn't a good use of company funds. Now I know the running of a shop costs some money in power, labor and maintenance. But I was clocked out and the tools were basically all my own personal tools. So I said, I was clocked out and only using my own tools. The company isn't actually spending anything for me to do my own work, regardless. While on company property you will only work on company projects. If you want to work on personal projects, you must do it in your own shop." I considered explaining how the shop is 95% all my tools and equipment. But I only had about a month left in my co-op before heading back to classes next semester. And I was planning on taking my tools back by that time anyway. So cue malicious compliance. I concluded the conversation with HR lady by asking for a transcription of her verdict in an email. I then waited until everyone had left from work the next day. Then spent about an hour rounding up all of my tools and putting them in the back of my truck. I took them home, and the next day went into work to find my department in chaos. I was immediately called into my supervisor's office and sat down. My supervisor was a pretty chill guy, so he calmly asked why I cleaned out my stuff. I simply showed him the email from HR lady, and explained that if I can only do company projects on company property, then I will also only use my personal property for personal projects. He laughed a bit to himself under his breath, asked me to forward the email to him, and then dismissed me. For the next month, I happily glued pieces of paper together to make simple form models while the entire department fell apart. We were unable to complete promised prototypes for our biggest client, lost that client as a result, and I left the company for good shortly thereafter. If you are going to run a company, it helps to provide your employees the equipment they need to adequately do their job. That company must have been really struggling if they couldn't purchase the tools needed to retain their biggest client in a month. Kinda stuck on, got big enough to hire an HR person. but not big enough to get business-critical equipment and expertise. What was their plan after you left? Sounds like the whole thing was going to implode anyway, and HR just hurried it along a bit. What I think is more sad is that the company never realized what was necessary to achieve its business goals. Why didn't they buy their own tools and equipment after your successful pitch? Honestly, the HR lady has a point. If you had been injured while working at their site, they would have been liable. Now, what if you have been injured using tools that had not been properly maintained? Given they weren't the company's tools? That would have been negligence. HR was foolish to make her point in the way she did. But the company was more foolish not to prepare for the inevitable departure of you and your tools. In the Navy, I was stationed on 3 subs. And on each boat I left a set of tools. In the early 90s while stationed on USS Sunfish, SSN 649, I became frustrated when tools would go missing, and supply was never cooperative about replacing them. While I understood the supply officers' frustration with spending the money, there were so many hands in each of the toolboxes. Many things were bound to go missing, or be broken. Submarines having a round hull meant that anything dropped topside, outside, was going straight into the harbor. The CHOP had a brilliant idea of having a master toolbox for the entire ship, like between 130 people. Only one guy was going to need a 7/16 box end. The idea was absurd. Anytime I attended a maintenance briefing with the full chain of command, the captain, CO, would be pissed at the lack of progress in repairs and maintenance. I would tell him that I'm waiting my turn to use the socket set, as the CHOP refused to buy tools. I'd always make sure to throw in a compliment though, like how neat it was to see how much fun the junior officers, Yosh, were having, playing solitaire on their new Palm Pilots, one of the sub-tenders, a surface ship that's basically a floating repair shop for submarines, decommissioned while I was on Sunfish. I had several friends over there, so I went to see if I could walk over with an 1149 supply form to get some of their no longer needed hand tools, and was disgusted to find that they were actually destroying all the tools. They'd never let their crew just take them, and apparently it was too much work in documentation to transfer them off hull. I did a little dumpster diving for wrenches. The cut-in-half wrenches made good candidates for fabricating specialty tools. And I found an intact wall mount fan which I still have today. Coming up on 30 years. In my workshop, I finally bought myself the tools I would need to efficiently get my work done, and swore they were coming with me when I left the boat. When I transferred off the boat, the tools stayed. Who would have been hurt by me taking my tools with me? All my brothers from other mothers. The last thing any one of us wants is to hurt our friends. The next boat was Minneapolis-St. Paul, SSN 708. That boat should have been USS Bahika. Bend over. Here it comes again. The hits just kept coming. Plus, as an added bonus, 9/11 happened during that tour, and the general knee-jerk reaction in security requirements, among other things, was pretty tough to bear. I mentioned in another story that there were 4 suicides and a 5th attempt in my 4 years on MSP. While there were still no tools to be found, and since I left my Sunfish tools on Sunfish, I made sure to complement the chain of command on the Yosh even nicer Palm Pilots, and brought another set of my tools for the MSP. On MSP, I increased my tool set to include electric and pneumatic impact wrenches, and brought my own electronics test equipment and tools. Additionally, after 9/11, all security watch standers stood watch with loaded weapons, chambered rounds. When watch turnover happened, we turned over cleared weapons. Clearing the 9mm chambers during turnover was really difficult for a lot of people. Almost all the issues were bullets going into the harbor. When the watch improperly pulled the slide back, allowing the bullet to simply fly off yonder into the harbor. Some were accidental weapons discharges. While I certainly couldn't do anything about an accidental discharge, I kept a box of 9mm shells hidden in my car. Because OMG, the paperwork when a bullet was lost. They would actually call in a team of divers to search for the bullet on the bottom of the harbor. When I transferred off MSP, I took my fluke multimeter and my electronics hand tool roll, leaving everything else. I did the same thing on Boise SSN 764. Except that I found myself complimenting the chain of command on their neato Blackberries. Instead of Palm Pilots, there was still, apparently, no money for tools. Agina. I left them all when I transferred. Except the electronics stuff. You don't hire an intern to fix problems in your department. I've worked with incredibly capable interns that were better than some of the employees. But you can't depend on that. And they will leave you after a term or two. I don't understand why what the HR woman was saying to you was anything to do with our. So at no point nobody bothered to put in a request for equipment to actually do the work that you're being paid to do? I wish I could say you're exaggerating. But I've worked in corporate environments before. I used to work for Head Start and supplied my classroom with almost all supplies. At the end of one school year they told us not to assume we would get our classroom back for the next year, so I cleared everything I had bought out. I was let go after 9 years of employment about a week after cleaning my space. I believe it was a combination of removing my items from the room and because I was one of very few teachers that had a degree, so my pay was higher. Alternate universe. Hey, boss. HR says I can't use my tools here after hours. I was thinking I'd have to take my tools home. However, I'd be willing to put my personal projects on hold for a month and lease my tools to the company. That way, we can make a good presentation to this big client. After that, the company will be able to afford to buy its own tools and I'll be able to work on my own projects at home. HR busybodies have no business making operations decisions about how to run engineering spaces. I would think that's the shop manager's job. Though, in my experience, HR tends to just overflow with busybodies who stick their nose into places they have no business being. Too much free time, not enough actual talent or intellect, and overcompensated enough that their egos make them think they are entitled to authority over things they have no business being involved in whatsoever. This company made some serious management blunders. Also, let's be clear, if they wanted to launch a prototyping department and hired an intern on a 3-month co-op term to spearhead it, that really bodes poorly. That type of initiative needs to be driven by a serious talent acquisition, not short-term temp labor. Sometimes I can't believe how dumb the C-suite is. But then, it sure is fun watching them torpedo their own companies sometimes despite being warned by underpaid subordinates who know better but were consistently ignored by aforementioned overpaid busybodies. Popcorn. It's wild that so many people's takeaway from this is the HR was the bad guys. To recap, you were set up to fail by management that seems to have been taking advantage of an intern. When you did fail due to management's complete disinterest in providing you with the necessary tools to do a job you shouldn't have been doing in the first place, they then took advantage of the fact that you had better equipment than them. Right off the top of my head, I see multiple scenarios HR protected you from. 1. Your tools being broken. I have no doubt that management would not reimburse you for any damage done to any of your tools. They'd point to done company policy saying you have to use company equipment and maybe even write you up for breaking those rules. 2. Management stealing your tools once you leave. The fact that they never replaced them means they couldn't. Odds are they were going to claim all of those tools were theirs and you would have very little recourse. The fact that you brought them in the first place means you probably just would have accepted this. No offense. You were young and that's why they felt they could take advantage. 3. You getting injured. You better believe they would have gone all out to make sure you weren't covered by any of their insurance and, again, would have likely claimed those tools belonged to them. I wouldn't have been surprised if they claimed that you broke in and got hurt that way. So now you're bankrupt by medical bills and you got yourself a breaking and entering charge. HR saved all your assess. There's a reason your boss rolled over and accepted HR's rules. There's a reason HR wasn't concerned when you asked for her rules in writing. You were setting yourself up for catastrophe all so you could impress a management team that didn't care about you enough to give you even half the tools you needed to do your job. HR is generally your enemy, but if you're doing something really stupid it can create situations where they are correct. HR's decision here protected everyone. The department's later failure is just another stain on a management team that never once took that role seriously. The very next email should have been a list of all the tools you brought in, sent directly to HR lady with instructions to purchase said equipment under strict supervision of you. Wonder what the HR lady thought when she was job hunting next. Good MC. But don't do this. If the tools and process are yours, the business is yours. Don't do it for a pittance of a salary for someone who doesn't even know the value of a set of screwdrivers. And an intern financing the company workshop? Sell your stocks, folks. 'Cause that place is going nowhere fast. I would have gone into that second meeting with a quote for the continued rental of your tools. It's interesting how so many companies allow their HR people to run so far amok. That lady wasn't your boss. She's supposed to be stating her case to your boss, for him to make his decisions on. And a company that depends on an intern like this? That's insane. You should never bring personal tools or equipment into work for doing work unless you're paid extra for purchasing tools. If someone at work steals them or breaks them, they are not required to compensate you. I've worked in maintenance for some companies and seen a lot of guys bring in their own fancy tools, only to be read with anger when they get borrowed and go missing or break and they're just out the money from their own pockets. And if it's a phone or computer, then the company can legally take it and claim ownership if you used it for work. Even just texting or emailing about work, because it now contains proprietary information. If it ain't company provided, or if they ain't paying the bill, do not use it for work. Another story about a power-hungry HR twat who thought they knew better. A personal favorite of mine is these stories where someone brings in their own tools, materials and then is forced to take them away. Cue shocked Pikachu.
If you enjoyed this video, please check out our playlists full of similar content. Epicaricast is like doom scrolling for your ears. Please like, share, and subscribe.